Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. GT7 is officially 2 years old today, making it older than 50% of the Fortnite player base. Now in today's video we are going to dive in and have a look how the game's evolved and changed over that 2-year period, seeing where the game currently sits in terms of its overall life cycle and where the improvements have been made and where they still need to be made. We'll start off with the launch of the game and then I'll touch on a few factors and a few key moments throughout the game's life cycle, including some of the more worthy updates, and I will still talk about some of the controversy along the way. So let's dive in as we jump in to the 2-year anniversary of GT7 and have a look where the game is at. When it comes to game releases, Gran Turismo 7 always generates a ton of hype, and for the first time in almost a decade, we were getting a numbered release title. This was running on next-gen hardware, as well as actually being the first that crossed the generations, being available on PlayStation 4, but that didn't seem to matter too much. What was looking on offer was absolutely incredible. This was an insanely hyped up launch, perhaps the most I've ever seen for any racing title ever, and well, it was all backed up by very good reviews. In fact, the reviews around the time of release were almost perfect scores, absolutely positive about the game, saying that it was just absolutely the next generation of GT game, and that's kind of what we all wanted, a follow on from the glory days of Gran Turismo 2, Gran Turismo 3, 4, 5 and maybe not so much 6, but this seemed like a proper numbered GT title. People were absolutely putting rave reviews out there and a lot of people were buying into it. However, little did we know, absolute controversy was around the corner. GT7 launched and all of a sudden the game was a little bit different from what was spoken about in the reviews. Microtransactions were present and they were absolutely massive. In fact, they were terrible. Considering the state of the game's economy at launch, this seemed like it was absolutely plug-in, full-blown microtransaction use in a full-priced game, something that never ever goes down well and can outright kill a game instantly. Nobody wants to go ahead and put out the likes of 70 to 100 pounds on a game to then have it littered with microtransactions, which for the most part you would need to progress even further on in the game, and that's kind of how it felt at launch. Funnily enough, there was a reason that the reviews were so good, because these weren't turned on during the review process, so a lot of these kind of review outlets and such didn't get the same version of the game that the general audience got at release, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. The price of some of these cars had gone absolutely through the roof. Some cars that cost you $1 million in a previous title would now cost you upwards of 20 million credits, and that's all well and good if you've got an economy to back it, but this game didn't. It had probably the worst economy of any Gran Turismo game on launch, and it was very much there to push out the microtransactions. Thankfully it didn't work. This game got a ton of backlash at day one, and it got made even worse, I think around about update 1.07, when they got made even worse after a slight glitch, should I say, or should I say slight method involving Fisherman's Ranch, in which case I think we was only earning upwards of around about 800k an hour, and that was the best we could do around the launch time of the game. This then got taken back and completely nerfed, and the audience were absolutely up in arms at Polyphony at this. It was even worse than it was on launch, making this whole microtransaction thing that we could throw at the developers even worse than previously. Now they did backpedal on this rather quite quickly. In fact, when the servers went out and such, and Polyphony were kind of there apologizing, promising all these features down the line, and quite quickly on from the launch we got our first proper update content, the likes of the Spa 1 hour event. We also had free grinding events, and the economy got reshuffled to be much fairer towards the player, and that was around about a month to a month and a half after launch. Whilst it was all looking good on the surface and it was looking like Polyphony were listening, considering the fact that we actually got some ways to earn a decent chunk of change, a little glitch did shine through with these early updates, and that was the 600 pp Tomahawk glitch, which involved using the Tomahawk XVGT, perhaps the most brutal car in the entire game, and abusing the tuning system, which at this point did take into account gear ratios as well as the likes of suspension tuning, dropping it to 600 pp and running the 600 Tokyo event to earn upwards of 3 million credits per hour. And whilst it was maybe a little bit overkill, and I think we all knew eventually Polyphony would patch it, I don't think anybody expected it to be such a long running glitch and a long running sort of community versus Polyphony and Sony kind of affair. This went on for many hot fixes until eventually it was killed off in its entirety, at least for a bit anyway. However, it did kind of shine through Polyphony's true intentions. That glitch pretty much killed off microtransactions in the early days of this game. They were almost meaningless. Now when it comes to buy in-game economy, it's £17 for about 2 million credits, which we were earning in around about 30 to 40 minutes. So it really did kind of, take away the whole point of microtransactions, which for like me, who's never spent a penny on microtransactions in any game, was absolutely fantastic. And it did become a whole community spirit as the community fought back against Polyphony's early, treachery when it came to the whole economy on launch, and it did feel like a win for the community until eventually this was fully patched out. However, again, like I mentioned, Polyphony's true intentions did shine through, and that's going to then lead me on to the next key moment in GT7's life cycle, the whole sort of September to November of 2022. By the time the latter stages of 2022 had rolled around, GT7 had started to release absolutely terrible updates. There was just really feeling like a lack of support for the game, a lack of tracks, which is still prevalent today and I will talk about towards the end of the video, as well as the likes of lack of true cars coming to the game and lack of worthy content with each update. However, September, October and November had arrived, and whilst the game was still receiving pretty poor updates in September and October of 2022, we also saw our first updated GT car in the form of the Nissan GTR 2018, getting that one more up to standard. However, alongside this came the return of the Tomahawk. Some reason, with a few physics changes and such like that, the game had completely transformed and allowed the abuse of the 600 Tomahawk once again, and players started earning millions of credits per hour, maybe not at the rate that was the first time around, but definitely more where the game should be. This actually felt rather quite fair. In terms of the credits, it wasn't absolute overkill, but it was still much better than what was on offer. However, this was very quickly patched after only a month, and that one then dwindled out. However, to coexist with this one, we finally got the launch in November of 2022 of the car selling shop. This was a feature that was actually in the game's description at launch and wasn't present until all that time later. November 22 kind of stands out to me as the first proper update of GT7 in terms of bigger updates. It really felt like it started adding features to the game that were really crucial to the life cycle of the game. Buying cars came in, we also had the likes of the Sierra, I believe the BMW as well. It just felt like a good spot for the game. As well as November also saw the GT World Finals and the whole prediction campaigns, and we started seeing those come to a head with free cars rewarded to players for answering questions. To be honest, towards the end of 2022 it did seem like the game was picking up once again, especially considering during December we got a group of 5 cars in one update. This was the most we'd ever seen in an update, and it did seem to be the new standard going forward. It also featured a bunch of requested vehicles. The likes of the most up-to-date Corvette came to the game, as well as some absolutely other awesome machines. So towards the end of 22 it did seem like the game was going on the right track. However, it was complete radio silence until February 2023, when it did seem like the momentum continued. So Polyphony took their first month off in January 2023 with no update present, and whilst it did feel like an absolute eternity without any new content, the content that had come before it was absolutely fantastic. And this would carry on in February of 2023 when we knew that Polyphony were cooking, considering the PSVR 2 would launch this month and GT7 would get day one support. And it was absolutely fantastic. This again felt like a great time in GT's life cycle. We also got the launch of our second proper post-launch track in the form of Grand Valley Highway 1, and whilst it was a little bit controversial in terms of taking a absolute legend of the Gran Turismo world and kind of butchering it just slightly, it did make for a very good track for PSVR 2 at least. So overall I would say February was a fantastic time, and yeah, it did feel quite good. Then on to March and April, we actually finally saw the release of the buyable engine swaps and such, and ultimate tuning parts. This did require you to hit level 50, however most players would be there by this point. It's very easy to get to level 50, so the requirement really isn't that strict, and it really isn't that far off really for any player. It can be done in way under 20 hours. So overall some good features once again. However, after this very early stages of 2023, the game would pretty much fade out once again and go back to just like 2022 with those awful middle of the year updates. They were just absolutely terrible. There was bad update after bad update. And that's going to quite nicely lead me on to the next phase of GT7's life cycle, the later stages of 2023. So before we get into late 2023, it did seem like the game had kind of gone through a few cycles. In the early year, we were getting decent updates. In 2022, we saw crucial features and changes that should have been there on launch actually being implemented, and actually having Polyphony listen to the community, even if they were a little bit different in terms of their overall intentions with things like the Tomahawk glitch. Then obviously towards the later stage of 2022, we saw the likes of decent update content before actually continuing that on into early 2023, where once again we had the likes of PSVR 2, new tracks, and some again decent content to coexist. However, the game once again fell into that awful slog in the middle of the year, just like it did in 2022, and that's going to bring me on quite nicely to the later stages of 2023. And we'll start at August, when the long-awaited Gran Turismo movie was finally being released. However, from those I guess movie trailers, should I say, there was a ton of cars that weren't prevalent in Gran Turismo 7, and a lot of people, myself included, were quite hyped. Surely they wouldn't release the movie without updating the likes of the GT3 machines, as well as some of the, I guess, Group 1 machines as well, which were also present in these trailers but not present in Gran Turismo 7. So a lot of people thought this would be a big update to coexist with the movie, and surely Polyphony would ride the hype featuring GT7 so heavily in the Gran Turismo movie, as well as a influx of new players from the movie. Surely this was their time to absolutely nail down a big update for the start of the late stages of 2023, but it wasn't meant to be. In fact, we perhaps got one of the weakest hype build-ups for a movie and video game adaptation ever. They released a limited time trial with featuring a reskinned version of an already existing car. The 2018 GTR, which came along with the October 22 update, now got the, I guess, livery from the movie, and that was it. It was absolutely terrible, and it continued on that mid-year slog. In fact, this will continue all the way until November of 2023, when Spec 2 finally released. This was a biggie. This was the kind of update that absolutely overhauls the game, changes everything about it, and finally gets GT7 back to where it needs to be. And in a sense, this update certainly did that. There was a ton of additions with this update, coexisting with obviously some of the previous editions, the likes of selling cars and buying cars and stuff like that, as well as buyable engine swaps. It felt like we were finally starting to get that complete product that we were promised all the way back in the likes of 2020, 2021, and then obviously all the way up until launch. It finally felt that GT7 was going in the right direction. Spec 2 overhauled the game, a bunch of new licenses came in, a ton of events came in, actually catering more towards different types as well. Considering that we typically get the Chase the Rabbit event, we saw the likes of the players starting on pole in the wet and having to defend, as well as a bunch of events coming into tracks that were very much long forgotten, as well as covering a ton of categories. This was a great update. We saw many overhauls, and it felt like GT7 was finally getting to where it should be. Was it perfect? Absolutely not, but this was certainly an update that this game needed. However, the hype dwindled out quite quickly. Around 2 months without an update, and we started getting into 2024 and the current state of the game. Come January 2024, the hype for Spec 2 had started to dwindle away, and the game definitely needed another influx of content and some new events to play around with, or maybe even some new features. So into January, and the first update of 2024 finally releases. However, this would prove to be one of the most controversial ones yet. Not only was it very light on content, only featuring 3 events, in terms of the vehicles, there was only 3 of them. That featured 2 previously announced VGTs coming to the game. However, only one of them would actually show up. The Genesis and Bulgari VGT were announced in the previous year at the World Finals, and well, the Genesis did show up, pretty much free for all players that took part in that viewers campaign. However, the Bulgari was nowhere to be seen, controversially locked behind a £4,500 DLC on a month basis. So basically you were buying into exclusivity not only for the watch but also a vehicle in game, and that meant that 99% of the players weren't getting the free cars that were promised. We were only getting 2, and whilst yes, it was still a VGT, it was at least a bit of extra content considering how light January was on overall content. So it really didn't go down well, and that's going to bring me on to February of 2024. So things would definitely improve in February of 2024, and whilst the update itself was once again light on the likes of events and I guess extra content, the cars themselves this time around were actually decent. We had finally the release of the Elite Evo 9 coming to the game, a car that a ton of players had wanted. We also saw the release of the quirky Renault 4 as well as the Bulgari VGT finally making it into the game after that 1 month hiatus away from 99% of the players due to that exclusivity with the watch. So this was a bit of a 4-car update as well as a bit of a filler content. The Audi TTS from 2009 did come along as well. So overall much better in terms of the car, but again still very light on actual content and things to do with these vehicles. And I would say in terms of the events, this was the worst it had ever been. The 3 events that came with the game totaled a massive 9 laps and wasn't even enough to complete a daily marathon. It was very poor and really unworthy of being counted as update content. It would have been easier just to kind of put in no events and just give us the cars at this point to give it a bit of a less of a kick in the teeth than what we actually did see. So whilst the cars had improved, the content itself hadn't, and again that will lead me to where we are now, March 4th 2024, 2 years down the line from GT7's release, and I'm going to give you my final thoughts. So GT7's second anniversary, has the game improved since launch? Absolutely. This is almost an entirely different product to what we saw at launch, and whilst that was shrouded in controversy, I honestly feel like GT7 has come a long way since then. It was absolutely terrible, and don't get me wrong, we've still had some very, I guess, dismal updates in between, and they can't really cater to absolutely everyone. In terms of the core game, GT7 has massively improved since launch. The likes of physics changes at its core has made GT7 the best handling Gran Turismo game of all time. In fact, I would go as far to say this is perhaps one of the best racing games at its core in terms of overall feeling, being able to cater to not only a casual audience but people that want to take it a bit more seriously as well. I don't think driving in a racing game has ever been this good in any other previous GT game. GT7 absolutely sets the standard for that and feels absolutely superb. But at the end of the day, I feel like GT7 feels a little bit like a prologue to a bigger product. Hopefully they take all the criticism on all the things that went wrong with GT7 and make Gran Turismo 8 an absolute masterpiece. I don't think GT7 will ever hit the hype of Gran Turismo 2 and Gran Turismo 4. I honestly don't even feel like it's on that level. However, at its core, I would go on to say that Gran Turismo 7 is the best feeling Gran Turismo game at its core. The racing is absolutely fantastic. The handling model is not only good enough that it caters towards a casual audience, but also people that want to take it seriously as well. And not many games can match that accessibility. Not only is it, I guess, realistic enough to cater towards, you know, having to go and use a wheel and improving your overall times, but if you just want to sit back and relax like the old days of Gran Turismo on a controller, you can also do that as well, obviously assisted by the likes of haptic feedback and such from a DualSense controller. So at its core, GT7 is a good game. Do I think they're ever going to absolutely nail everything with this game? Absolutely not. But Gran Turismo 7 feels like the prologue to something that could become absolutely fantastic. As long as Polyphony listen to that fan feedback, they should absolutely nail Gran Turismo 8, and I feel like GT7 kind of sets the foundation strong for where this series needs to go. Don't get me wrong, the post-launch content isn't superb. Is GT7 overall a perfect game? Absolutely not. Is it the best in the series? Absolutely not. But at its core, this is a game that could be something not only amazing come the end of its life cycle, it could set the way for the Gran Turismo series to be absolutely spot on as long as Polyphony start opening their ears and listen to that fan feedback. So happy second birthday, Gran Turismo 7. You know, I guess it sounds like I hate on this game a lot, to be totally honest, and I really don't mean it. It actually comes from a place of wanting this product to improve and wanting to see my favourite ever racing series get back on the top step of the podium. At the end of the day, I owe GT7 a lot. I wouldn't be in the position I am. I wouldn't be able to live the life I do without this game. So I'm always going to be absolutely grateful for it. At the end of the day, it's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.